and I'm making this video about something that's really fascinating that I just uncovered. I've been researching the zodiacs a lot lately, and researching the nature of the Earth going around the Sun, and the ecliptic coordinates, and how that was measured in ancient times, and how that migrated to India, and all kinds of cool stuff. And I, in particular, have found the theories of a modern PhD, Dr. Robert Powell, to be very illuminating and in explaining a possible way to understand, particularly the tropical zodiac, that hasn't been really talked about much in astrological circles. At least I haven't heard much discussion about it. So before I get into that, I want to have you think about three things that maybe seem like they're related to each other, but they're actually not. And the first is the Earth going around the Sun, or what I'm going to call the seasonal zodiac. Okay, the seasonal zodiac, which, again, I'm not talking about 12 astrology signs, okay? I'm talking about a seasonal zodiac, okay? That's related to solstices, equinoxes, seasons. It's based on seasons, and it's the Earth going around the Sun, okay? And then I want you to think about the zodiac, and not primarily, but only at this point, sidereal zodiac, which are coordinates along the ecliptic. The zodiac is and was conceived primarily, or I don't mean primarily, but I mean initially, or you could say primarily, as the primal zodiac. The original zodiac was these ecliptic coordinates around the Earth, where we mapped specific points of the planets moving around the Earth and the Earth moving around the Sun. The Sun was also measured with ecliptic coordinates in every ancient system. Indians used a sidereal nakshatra-based ecliptic coordinate system. Babylonians and Egyptians used up to 30, sometimes more. And then eventually the Babylonians codified that ecliptic coordinate system and sidereal-based, into 12 equal portions to emulate the 12 solar cycles and the Earth around the Sun. This is why there are 12 30-degree portions, 30-degree zodiac signs, to emulate one cycle of the Earth around the Sun and 12 lunar cycles. So again, understand, the seasonal zodiac of the Earth going around the Sun has nothing whatsoever to do with the band of stars and the sidereal zodiac, the ecliptic coordinate system, okay? And now ponder what we call the calendar, right? We have a calendar. Starts in January, blah, 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 it goes through. So the calendar has nothing to do with the zodiac signs. For example, if it's January 3rd, it's not meaningful at all for being able to decide that there's a planet in some place, except for the Sun, okay? We know where the Sun is on January 3rd. Especially if we use the sidereal, it's not going to change constantly. Relationship of the calendar to the zodiac doesn't exist. The relationship of the Sun going around, or the Earth going around the Sun, also to the sidereal, has nothing to do with each other. As we can see, now they're 24 degrees apart, once they were pinned together by the Greeks. Now, the thing to understand is that, according to Dr. Robert Powell, who did his PhD thesis on this, the origin of the zodiac, of the tropical zodiac, was likely a solar almanac, a calendar, not an astrological system. Because this was happening at the same time that the Earth was developing its calendars. For example, the Julian calendar in Rome, after Julius Caesar, was also being developed at this time, when we were developing our calendars, trying to connect our orbit around the Earth to the sky And what the Greeks did, and according to Dr. Robert Powell, again, his PhD thesis was on this, extremely well researched and cross-referenced with every leading expert into the science, was that it was actually a move to try to codify a calendar and a solar almanac, not an astrological system. Now, again, just ponder for a second, what if that had happened? What if that had worked? We would have a calendar now based on, let's say the first day of the year is the first day of the vernal equinox, or the solstice. That would be the beginning of the year. It was a good idea, but it didn't work. Shortly after that, Alexandrian Library burned or whatever, you know, and we lost a lot of the knowledge, and the world is chaotic, and these things are confusing. His theory, and again, this is a theory, this is a scientific theory. Just like Einstein's theory of relativity is a scientific theory, all right? There are people who don't think it's right, that don't think it's correct. But Dr. Robert Powell's theory, for which he was awarded a doctorate, so defense of this theory earned him a doctorate because it was so well researched and so well cross-referenced with the supporting data, is that the sun and the solar calendar, or a solar calendar, was the origin of this move by the Greeks to pin the zodiac, or to pin the seasonal zodiac to the existent stellar-based sidereal one, the 12 30-degree portions that came from Babylon into Greece and down to Egypt. And by the way, if you're still doubting that scientific fact, please don't doubt it. I know there's been some bad science, frankly, for the last several years where people doubt that the sidereal zodiac is even legitimate, or that it was ever a zodiac, and Rashis are tropical, and there's no such thing. This is simply not true. The origin of the zodiac is sidereal, Babylonian. It was then exported to Egypt, where they were using what were called the decans. But then eventually this sidereal-based approach was joined the Earth going around the sun, seasonal zodiac, after the Greeks discovered the precession of the equinoxes and that the Earth's orbit was slipping back a little bit. So they conflated these two in accordance, at least as Dr. Robert Powell would indicate. And he doesn't make it out like it was a mistake. He says that it's probably a mistake, that it was never meant to be devised as an astrological system. Whether you believe that or not, it's very interesting. And I talk about this in my web class. I will tell you that the reason I find the theory fascinating is because it also comports really well with what I see happening, especially a lot of the defenses of those who well, frankly, defend the idea that Indians were always using sidereal, always using tropical zodiac. For instance, back in the Rig Veda and the Vedanga Jyotisha, it's very clear that the Indians were aware that we were going around the Earth, that there were seasons, that there were equinoxes and solstices. They were aware of all of this. And they were aware of 12 months. And we still use basically the same 12-month system in India, the solar months, that were in the Vedanga Jyotisha. If not exactly, almost exactly. I think the months are named different. But the mapping was not tropical zodiac. It was ecliptic sidereal mapping. They didn't say that the solstice happened in Cancer and Capricorn. They said the solstice happened in Shravishta, which is Dhanishta, and Aslesha. Purely sidereal. So the reason I'm saying this, again, is because there's no indication that just because there was a mapping of the Earth around the Sun, that this was an indication to erect horoscopes and practice astrology using a tropical zodiac. Again, one of the things that I see that I don't agree with at all is a conflation of these ideas. That simply because the Indians knew we were going around the Earth, and that there were seasons, and that there was a zodiac, and that there were 12, let's say, portions of the year, which all of that is very compelling, but that's the same we have now with the calendar. That's called a calendar. And as we just proved, and as we prove now, the calendar has nothing to do with the zodiac. Think about this for a second. The calendar has nothing to do with the zodiac. If it did, then the only one that's close to that would be the sun, because the sun is very consistently going around the zodiac, but all the other planets, which is what astrology maps accurately and what the sidereal positions were meant to map, astrologically, there's no correlation between the calendar and the zodiac. So, and I want to say this, and by the way, this also really comports well with what you see in the Surya Siddhanta. In the Surya Siddhanta, again, first of all, it's called Surya Siddhanta, the Siddhanta of the sun. It's all about the sun. It's about the earth going around the sun, seasons connected to the sun, equinoxes, sun, a bunch of different year lengths. It's all about the earth going around the sun and how to measure it from every different angle. Other things too, for sure. But there is no directive to erect horoscopes based on what we now call the tropical zodiac. It's simply not there. It's not in any of the Indian texts. In fact, there's no mention of zodiac signs back in the Vedas or anything after the 1st century, unless you want to start thinking that texts are older than they are, which I know people do that. But again, I don't want to get into all that in this video, but the point is, what we see and what we can reliably state in the Indian texts comports very well with what Dr. Powell said also about the solar almanac. Again, what if you read all of those statements in Surya Siddhanta, even in the Rig Veda, and certainly when you look at the difference in the zodiacs now, does it comport with the idea that all of those measurements of the earth going around the sun was actually just a calendar? I mean, you can reduce it to this. Again, there's so much charge around zodiacs and which zodiac is right and all of that, and to me, it's just gotten way off the map. And I want to say, I also honor people using either zodiac. I'm not against people using tropical zodiac, because at the time that the zodiac systems were developed, the two zodiacs, the sidereal and the tropical, were born at that time that we started practicing astrology. So horoscopic astrology happened like right at the same time that the Greeks pinned the sidereal zodiac to the seasonal zodiac. So there are systems that developed, and either system can work to erect horoscopes. My only issue here is to just see what happened and see what the basis is and try to understand, as it's a fascinating subject. I'm not trying to make anybody look bad or feel bad or anything. I honor everybody's system. There are great, tropical Vedic astrologers who are doing great work and saying great stuff. Listen to them, study with them, learn from them. I'm not saying they're wrong, okay? I do hear some things that are said that I don't think are correct, and this is part of that is, again, we all have to get our ideas out there. But I'm not a fundamentalist that's saying that everybody using tropical, let's say Vedic astrologers using tropical zodiac are wrong. I'm sure they're not. I'm sure that based on the methods they use, they get better results. So all of that notwithstanding, it's not to punk anybody or say anybody's wrong. It's just to get to the truth of what I think is interesting hypothesis. And certainly to get clear about these zodiacs, because there's been a lot of ideas about zodiacs that I just haven't been factual. So just notice how well this theory might comport with what you read in the Rig Veda and say, were they maybe just talking about the calendar? And understand that the calendar has nothing to do with the zodiac. They are different things. One is to measure what season it is, where we are when we start planting crops or whatever, what season it is. Should I wear a coat? Should I not? That has nothing to do with the fact that a planet is in Scorpio or whatever it is. And again, it's very easy to say, well then can't we just use the tropical zodiac? But I want to also point something out to you again, and I said this intentionally at the beginning. The zodiac is an ecliptic measuring system of coordinates. Even in the Rig Veda, back in the Vedas, they were measuring these solstices with ecliptic coordinates. When you nail the ecliptic coordinates to the tropical zodiac that's always moving. It's like you're nailing the map to a moving object. It's like saying, if you're trying to find something, literally, let's say it's a map. Let's say in order to get to the place you need to go a mile, turn left, and then turn right. But then, as you're on your way, I change the map, or I nail the destination to the map. Now you're on the same map as the thing you're trying to find. So again, the ecliptic coordinate sidereally was conceived to be exactly that, to measure precise coordinates along the ecliptic, including the solstices and equinoxes and the sun. It was harder with the sun because once the sun comes up you can't see the stars, but there were ways around that with heliacal risings and other things, and also, like in the Indians, with the full moons, because we see the full moons. This is why even today we have months that are based on the likely nakshatra that the full moon will be in. So there's ways around all of that, but the point is this. And by the way, those months aren't named based after Rashis. They're named after the likely nakshatra. Ashad, Kartika. They're not named Taurus. They're not named Sagittarius or Danu. Anyway, again, it's not to try to prove people wrong, but it's to get us thinking a little differently, that maybe there's a difference between, or maybe the move to join the seasons with the zodiac was maybe an attempt to join the seasons with the calendar. Isn't that a much better alignment? Again, if that would have been the move, then we would have had the seasons begin the year. And then we would be mapping planets based on where they actually are, based on the ecliptic longitudes and coordinates. Instead now, again, and according to Robert Powell, and I do happen to agree, I'm a sidereal astrologer, now, of course you have zodiacs that don't align. They're off because they have nothing to do with each other. Again, realize, they have nothing to do with each other. And it's not that they aligned at one point and then diverted. No, they never aligned. They were sidereal, then the Greeks pinned them to the seasons. And now, a couple thousand years later, they have nothing to do with each other, because they never did. Again, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying people that use tropical zodiac are making this horrific mistake, because again, there's ways to account for this. Western astrology especially has all kinds of evolving techniques and precise ways of measuring things, and most of the things that work astrologically aren't necessarily based on signs. They're based on planets and houses and all kinds of things. So both systems work. And I don't just say that to try to be a hippie and make everybody get along. If I didn't believe it, I wouldn't say it. But I already know it. So that's not the issue. It's not to make people wrong. It's to get the story straight and to think, wow, that's pretty amazing. And to me, it clears up so much of the confusion in the Vedic astrology world right now, which is, well, Surya Siddhanta says this, so they were clearly using tropical zodiac, and this says this, it was clearly tropical zodiac, and this, and when I read all of that, it looks like they're talking about the calendar, because I don't see them saying to erect horoscopes that way. And let's be clear, that's what it is when you say they were using tropical zodiac. It's not good enough that they just understood that we were on the Earth, that we were moving around the sun. Okay, that's not evidence of using the tropical zodiac as we now define it. Particularly when they're measuring it with ecliptic coordinates based on nakshatras. You can't say that's evidence of the tropical zodiac. Okay? So anyway, check out the web class, because I go into this in enormous detail, in a lot of detail, and it's a lot of research mainly. It's very little of this kind of theorizing. It's some of it for sure, because it's almost 2 hours, but it's mainly the research that shows how the zodiac was originally, Babylonian and then moved, and then how these things could have happened. And, there's a lot of other stuff. There are a lot of people who really question, especially Western sidereal astrologers, particularly a man named Cyril Fagan. He was an Egyptologist, went back and said, wait a minute, this should have never been a zodiac. So, anyway, I don't want to diss the tropical zodiac either, but if you're interested in the subject of the zodiacs, I certainly invite you to check out the web class. And I wanted to share this because I'm really of the opinion, or getting much closer to the opinion, that Dr. Robert Powell and his extremely well-researched thesis, doctoral thesis on this theory, again, this is a theory, a scientific theory. And people theorize all the time about stuff, but it's not really supported by very good data. So when you see people theorizing about stuff, check their theories. If they're theorizing about something and it's like, well, wait a minute. Again, I don't listen to anybody's theories. I actually honor people. When I see someone theorizing about something, I admire that they're putting something out there, but then I'll research it and say, wait a minute, how old is this text again? What's the story behind that? I don't really know about that. Someone who has got a PhD on their thesis already gets my attention. And the book itself is so well researched and cross-referenced with all of the authoritative science behind it that even that is worth looking into. You know, the book itself, besides that theory, just all of the supporting arguments where you see how the zodiac moved and you see why he might think this and all that stuff. I talk about this more on the web class, so I don't want this to keep going on and on, but I wanted to share this, and I hope you're having a good week, and we'll talk soon.